In the 2024 film adaptation of Pedro Páramo, directed by Rodrigo Prieto, the story begins with Juan Preciado, a young man traveling through the vast and desolate landscapes of Mexico. His heart carries the weight of a final promise, a dying wish made by his mother, Dolores Preciado. In her last moments, she pleads with him to travel to Comala, the town of her youth, to find his estranged father, Pedro Páramo, a man Juan has never known. With nothing but the vague memories of his mother's stories, Juan arrives in Comala with the expectation of finding his lost heritage, of confronting the man who abandoned them, of demanding answers from the father who never cared for them. Yet, as he enters the town, something is profoundly wrong. Instead of the lively, sunlit village his mother described, a place filled with music, laughter, and the scent of ripe fruit, he finds nothing but silence, ruins, and an unbearable sense of emptiness. The streets are deserted. The buildings are crumbling. A strange mist hangs over the land, distorting reality, making it difficult to tell if the town is abandoned or if something unseen lurks in its corners. One feels the weight of invisible eyes watching him, but there is no one there, or at least no one alive. As he ventures deeper, he meets a series of strange figures, wandering souls, whispering voices, shadows that speak in riddles. Their words confuse him, filling his mind with fragmented stories of pain, longing, and betrayal. They seem to know his father. They seem to have lived under Pedro Páramo's rule. Yet their voices carry something otherworldly, as if they are trapped in the past, repeating their stories over and over, unable to move on. It is then that one realizes the truth. Comala is no longer a town of the living. He is walking among ghosts. As one pieces together the fragments of the past, he begins to understand who his father truly was. Pedro Páramo was not just a man. He was a ruler, a landowner, a tyrant who controlled everything and everyone in Comala. His name alone carried power. People whispered it in fear, for he decided who thrived and who perished. His greed knew no bounds. He took what he wanted: land, wealth, people. He forced entire families into servitude, manipulated alliances to expand his dominion, and punished those who dared to oppose him. He was the unchallenged patriarch of Comala, the master of its fate. Yet, for all his power, he was haunted by one thing: his love for Susana San Juan. She was his obsession, the one thing he could not control, the woman who defined his entire life. No matter how much he conquered, how much he gained, he remained empty without her. When she was taken from him, he let his sorrow consume him. His grief turned to cruelty. He let the town rot, ignoring the cries of the people, drowning himself in regret and despair. Comala became a place of suffering, mirroring the emptiness in his soul. His rule was absolute, but it came at a price. The town became a graveyard long before death arrived. And now, even in death, his presence lingers. Juan's encounters with the spirits of Comala grow more frequent, more disturbing. He meets Damiana Cisneros, a woman who once served Pedro Páramo, whose voice carries the weight of forgotten sorrow. He speaks with Edgevige's Diada, a woman who claims she had been expecting him even before he arrived. He hears the voices of the countless men and women who lived and died under Pedro's rule, their fates forever bound to the land. Each conversation reveals another piece of the puzzle. Comala is not just haunted. It is trapped in time, cursed to relive its tragedies over and over again. The people who once lived here were never given peace. They suffered under Pedro's power, and when the town finally collapsed, their souls never left. They are trapped in the echoes of their past, whispering their regrets, waiting for something that will never come. As Juan listens to their stories, he feels himself falling deeper into the town's spell. He begins to question his own reality. Is he still among the living? Or has he, too, become part of Kamala's endless cycle of death? Juan realizes that his quest is no longer about finding his father. Pedro Páramo is dead. He has been dead for years, but his shadow remains. Juan has spent his life wondering about the man who abandoned him, about the father who never came to find him. He imagined confronting Pedro Páramo, demanding justice, seeking closure. But now, standing among the ruins of Comala, surrounded by the voices of the dead, he understands that his father's punishment has already been delivered. Pedro Páramo, for all his power, died alone, unloved, and haunted by the ghosts of his sins. His own cruelty destroyed him. His empire crumbled into dust, and yet his story did not end with his death. His actions continue to echo through time, affecting even those who never knew him. Even Juan himself. The longer one stays in Comala, the weaker he becomes. The town is consuming him. The whispers grow louder. The faces of the dead become clearer. The stories of the past pull him under, like waves dragging a drowning man into the depths of the ocean. He can no longer tell if he is dreaming or awake, alive or dead. He came here looking for answers. Instead, he found a graveyard of memories. And now, Comala will never let him go. As Juan Preciado wanders deeper into Comala's haunted ruins, his grip on reality begins to slip. The town is no longer just a collection of abandoned homes and empty streets. It is a living, breathing memory, a purgatory where the past refuses to be forgotten. The voices that once whispered in the shadows now speak more clearly, calling out to him, telling him their stories, pulling him further into their tragic pasts. The villagers of Comala, or what remains of them, are trapped in an endless cycle of suffering, unable to find peace, condemned to relive their fates over and over again. Some speak of starvation and desperation, abandoned by Pedro Páramo when he let the town collapse into ruin. Others tell of broken loves, stolen lands, and betrayals. Each voice is another thread in the dark tapestry that Pedro wove through his greed, his cruelty, his unchecked power. And Juan, he is no longer sure if he is merely a visitor, or if he, too, is becoming part of Comala's curse. Through the whispers of the dead, Juan learns of the final years of his father's reign. Once, Pedro Páramo was the most powerful man in Comala, a landowner who ruled with absolute control. He decided who lived, who prospered, and who suffered. But for all his wealth, he was a prisoner of his own desires. His obsession with Susana San Juan, the woman he could never truly possess, consumed him. She was his one weakness, the only person who held power over him, though she never sought it. When Susana died, Pedro Páramo let Comala die with her. He stopped caring for the land. He let crops rot in the fields. He ignored the people who begged him for mercy. He turned away from the world, drowning in his grief. And in doing so, he destroyed the town that had once feared and obeyed him. The villagers suffered not just because of his rule, but because of his neglect. Hunger, sickness, and despair overtook Comala. The people who once depended on him now cursed his name. And when they finally had nothing left, when the town was already a graveyard, a group of men rose against him. They came to his house, the grand estate that once stood as a symbol of his dominance. They found him old, broken, sitting in silence, surrounded by his memories. He did not resist. He let them kill him. And in that moment, Pedro Páramo was no longer a man, but a shadow, a memory that refused to fade. As one listens to the echoes of the past, he begins to realize the terrible truth. He came to Comala seeking a father he never knew, expecting to find a man who owed him answers. But there is no justice to be found here, no closure to be gained. Pedro Páramo is dead, yet his power still lingers. One now understands that his father's sins are not his own, but they have shaped his existence in ways he never realized. He was born from abandonment, from loss, from a legacy of suffering that he never chose. And now, Comala is claiming him too. The voices grow louder. The faces of the dead become clearer. Juan feels his strength fading. The more he listens, the more he becomes one of them. His body weakens, his thoughts scatter. He can no longer tell if he is alive or dead. And as he takes his final breath, he understands that Comala was never meant to be escaped. The film ends as it began, with silence, with stillness, with a town that remains lost in time. Juan Preciado's body lies in the dust, but his soul does not leave Comala. He, too, is now one of the voices, another whisper in the wind, another memory trapped in an endless cycle. Pedro Páramo, the man who once ruled everything, is nothing but a name spoken in the dark. And yet his presence endures. For as long as Comala remains standing, his sins will never be forgotten.